All right, hello everybody, and welcome to the Coming of Age panel. I'm GAP Jaxie, and this is...
And Wanderer D. Nice to meet you.
Both of us have been known to write the occasional coming of age story in our time. We were also supposed to have Ether Echoes, author of The Well of Pyrene, with us here. Unfortunately, she suffered a series of calamitous events. I'm going to say the Morgwin ate her car tires. And so while she will be here starting tomorrow at noon and will be in Sophus and Quills for anyone who wants to meet her, for right now, she has sent her speech notes, and I will do my best to be her. It is worth noting, she was an uncredited editor on my most popular story, Siren Song. So it appears twice she is going to write something brilliant, and I am going to attempt to claim credit for it. So we'll see how that goes.
As usually how it is.
Yeah. So let's just go ahead and jump right into it. And I'm going to get us started with what is a coming of age story. So if you just go look it up on Wikipedia or the dictionary, you will get that a coming of age story focuses on the growth of a protagonist from youth to adulthood, a literal coming of age, and gives a bunch of examples like Harry Potter or Huckleberry Finn or these twits. Yeah, I know, they actually get older over the course of the show. I think it's a voice actor thing. But if you were going by this definition, then literally the only requirement to say you wrote a coming-of-age story would be a child protagonist plus the passage of time, which is obviously not why you're all here. So what makes a good coming-of-age story? So at every point in someone's life, you are a blank slate. You don't know what you're meant for in the world, you don't know what you're good at, you don't know where life is going to take you. You could turn out to be a reporter. You could get really into the school paper when you're young and it blossoms into a lifelong career. Or you could be really shy, so you lock yourself away in the library and that's the start of your career as an academic. Or you could spend way too much time listening to talk radio and drinking and just become a really angry person all the time. And the question a coming of age story asks is why? Why did you turn out to be this person you ultimately are? Maybe you just had this huge crush on the princess when you were like 12, and you decided to get into royal genealogy to attempt to impress her, which led to you realizing that pony genetics are actually really interesting, and that started your career as a geneticist. Or maybe you were given glasses because you could barely see and teased mercilessly as a child. And this led you to appreciate that sometimes people get messed up through things that are absolutely no fault of your own, leading you to become a deeply empathetic person who spends their life caring for the less fortunate and worrying about others. Or maybe you were raised in a sweatshop and things were terrible and you realized that there is no nobility in poverty, and you swore with Celestia as your witness you'd never be poor again, thus starting your journey as a fashion-based supervillain who will not rest until the whole world is crushed under her dainty hoof. Or something like that. But there's a little more to it than that, because imagine you wanted to write this story. You wanted to explore why a young Sombra grew up to be evil. Well, ultimately, we know the answer. It's because he's just really a jerk, just deep down, jerk with a heart of jerk. Oh, fair enough. Okay. But if you were writing this story, this doesn't quite fit the simple why formula, because it's not a surprise how it ends. We all know how King Sombra ends up. And it's not really a question of why it happened, because if you're writing a story of a young magician struggling with the inner darkness in his heart, we have a few suspicions as to where this is going. No. The reader knows everything about where this is going, but this guy doesn't know everything about where this is going. Presumably, there was a point in his life where he was not convinced he was predestined to become the Dark Lord. He had dreams and aspirations and people he liked, and he was thinking, should I go into magic or should I become a baker? On the one hand, I could be a really good magician. On the other hand, being a baker is steady work. And ultimately, of course, we know what choice he made, but the reason he made it still shapes who he's ultimately going to become as a person. And that can make a really compelling story. We've all been here. There may be a few people who haven't, but I'm not so certain. To relate, my own coming of age story, there was a point in my life when I wanted to launch rockets into space. And this was not an idle fantasy. From middle school to the end of high school, I got perfect straight A's in every class because only the best of the best get to work at NASA. I worked my ass off to get a scholarship program so I could go to one of the best aerospace programs in the country, worked incredibly hard. I didn't go to a single party in 4 years in college. I was in my dorm room studying. Did incredibly well, graduated, took a breath, and realized that I am really bad at designing rockets. Like, really bad. I got decent grades in school, but I was working probably literally 4 times as hard as everybody else, and I hated every single second of it. I kept thinking, okay, this is terrible, but one day I'm going to power through this and I'm going to get to launch rockets. I don't like math, and I don't like engineering, and I don't like all these tables of books, but man, rockets. And then I realized that's literally what rocket science is. There is no next step, there's just this, and I hate this. So I did not end up becoming this pony. I ended up becoming this pony. I went to business school, and that started me down the path of darkness. When I was 18, I quite unironically said that anybody who went to business school was evil, because business school is where beautiful ideas that could make the world a better place get turned into Halloween costumes for dogs. And after I went to business school, I went, no, business school is where change happens, because everyone in this world other than you is a moron, and the only way to get them to do what you want is to bribe them relentlessly, and for that you need money. Now, there are other things about my life that didn't change. I'm still incredibly for the space program. The reasons I'm for it still haven't changed, and the ultimate good I want to do with it manifests in other ways. But this was my coming-of-age story. I didn't know who I was going to be. I had a specific notion of who I was going to be, much like these 3 fillies had a specific notion of who they were going to be, but it was wrong. Life took me in a different direction, and it's a very exciting direction, but it's not the one I expected. Just like they, if we had to guess where Scootaloo was going to go, we'd say, well, her special talent is obviously going to relate to her scooter. Sweetie Belle's is obviously going to relate to her music. Applejack's is going to, Apple Bloom is going to relate to her building things or potions or something like that. And that's not where the story took them. Just like if you looked at me, you would have said, straight A student, huge interest in rockets, all his classes are focused in rocketry. I can tell where this kid is going, and that's not where my life took me. A good coming-of-age story is an entire story from a short story to a long novel of getting your cutie mark. That is fundamentally what a coming-of-age story is about. It's about when a character goes from saying, I could be anything, to going, no, I couldn't be anything. I know roughly what kind of person I am. I know roughly what I want to do. I can see a life path laid out before me, and it's not infinitely diverging, and that's okay. I know pretty much who I am, and what I have is, in fact, what I want. And I'd like to do a quick exercise with the audience before I hand things off onto Wanderer D. I've given you one thing from my coming-of-age story, a dream from my childhood that was not meant to be. Not just because it was bad luck, not because things didn't go my way, because even if I could have it now, I've realized I don't want it. I'm not that person anymore. And by the way, nobody has to volunteer. If nobody wants to volunteer, we will skip this question. But if anybody would like to briefly share something, either from their lives or from a character they've written. Sure. Mm-hmm.
That story kind of stopped whenever I was 9 years old and I was getting out of San Diego Middle School. The last few days of school, I was talking about how I'm going to study to be a doctor with one of my friends. And this girl who was older than me, I believe 1 year, decided that you do realize that you also have to deliver babies. And I'm like,
That is the face of a man who has realized his destiny is not where he imagined it to be. All right. Perfect. Thumbs up. All right, another one. Something good in your life you could not have conceived of when you were younger. Yo.
I wanted to be a train driver when I grew up. That ended up not to be that.
All right. Is that something good? Excellent. Something you once believed was the most critical thing in the world that you no longer care about. Yo. All right, I will accept that. And finally, because not everybody changes that much, Something you once believed was important and you still believe is important. Front row.
Cars. Yes. Very, very important. They take you places, you put your life in them. Yes.
Wheels.
If your cars have hands, you got problems.
But it will be a really, really fun ride.
Yeah, Optimus Prime, you got Bumblebee. I think you got the opposite problem with your cars and hands.
Yeah, there we go.
Anyway, that I still believe important. Well, the automotive industry is ever growing, and it's
I'm going to stop you right there. I refuse to believe that when you were 6, you had strong opinions about the economic importance of the automotive industry. Okay.
All right.
I retract the comment. All right, but this is the essential aspect of it. You're young. You have some things you believe about who you're going to be and about who you are. Some of them are correct, and some of them are incorrect. And the question is, how do you discover which is which, and ultimately what events guide you to who you are? So I'm going to pass it off to Wanderer D, who will be able to give his take on that. We will then do Ether Echoes section, and we'll be handing out question cards as we go.
All right. Yeah. Okay, so when you're looking at this, when you're reading or writing a coming-of-age story, you're looking at it through the character's eyes, obviously. This is all about the character. And what is the thing that shapes this character, besides a few, events in their lives that are like life change? Those I would say are crossroads when you realize you're, apt for designing rockets or not, or if you want to deliver babies. So the main factor, I believe, in shaping your character or shaping the character you're reading is the social influence that they have. It can be anything from their nation, to a little town that is isolated from the rest of the country. So, to their group of friends, to their religion, anything will shape you, especially when you're young, into the positions that you're expected to have. When you reach the point, when a character is going through a coming-of-age story, they have to compare their personal beliefs, their observations, their understanding of the world with these concepts that they have been brought up with. And obviously that can go either way. They can, go through this great adventure and basically end up just like their dads, or, they can step out of that comfort zone of sorts and go wherever their future will take them. So one of the great examples of this is was written by that man on the picture over there, which you might recognize or not as clearly not Albert Einstein.
Crazy homeless guy up the street, I believe.
Yeah. Well, Mark Twain, he wrote.
That sounds right.
That sounds just about right. I think he is Mark Twain. I didn't get
It is Mark Twain, yes, I am messing with you.
I'm joking, of course. But so he wrote Huckleberry Finn, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Now, the reason I brought this specific story because Huckleberry grows in the South when it was perfectly admissible to have slaves. It was, it wasn't just admissible. It was appropriate. It was a sign of, a successful living. It was, the law was that, you were able to own a person. And obviously, we know it's not right, but that was the type of thinking that he grew up with. His father in the novel is completely racist to the point of it being, devastatingly offensive. And yet, Huckleberry Finn just starts traveling with Jim, and as he travels, as he gets to know this character, he doesn't see him he never saw him as an object, which is a big step. But as he starts getting to know this person, he realizes, well, he's a human, he has rights, he shouldn't be treated like this. And his coming of age at the end of the story is when he's faced with either doing the quote-unquote right thing at the time, which was giving Jim to the authorities and basically dooming him, or saying, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to let my friend go free, which is what he does. Spoiler.
I think we're a little past the statute of limitations on that one.
Like that is why this is a coming of age story. Like he rejects the concepts. He makes his own mind. He grows as a person to make his own decisions, and then he faces life where it takes him. Okay, obviously this is not the only example we have in literature. There's always the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit, for example. I like to bring the Hobbit up mostly, besides being a huge fan of Tolkien, is that coming of age stories don't have to be about kids. It's a growth of a character. And going by the original literary definition, I guess we could do the John Child plus age, approach. But Bilbo was already 30 by the time he stepped out, but he had already fallen into his society's expectations of what an adult should be like.
I will note, in my early example, my coming-of-age story starts at 22. 22 was when I was graduated and realized my beliefs were wrong.
All right, that's awesome. So again, another example of this. He's 30. He's doing his own thing, but when he gets the call to step out of his comfort zone, that's when he starts growing. And what ends up happening is he ends up literally hanging out with kings, elves, and everything. Returns richer than he was ever before, and obviously he's shunned by his community ever since. Outside of literature, we have plenty of other examples. If we go with the anime approach, anyone here is watching My Hero Academia? All right, there's 2 people. That's awesome. The main character, Midoriya, basically has no powers, and this is a society that's building a whole thing around superheroes, and his life dream is to be part of it. So his coming of age over here, which is still proceeding, so we don't know how it's going to end, is facing the fact that he doesn't have powers, and then suddenly facing the fact that he does have powers, and now he has to change everything that he was and he was aiming for to deal with this process of becoming an adult. Pretty much, and he just kind of can destroy just about anything, unlike a football player. And then there's another example in anime. If you guys have ever watched Wolf Children, which if you haven't, you should. I'm just saying that, and it's not a statement or an opinion. Well, it is a statement, not an opinion. It's a fact. This is a good example as well, because we're talking about brother or sister that come from, they're both human and wolves, and they have to deal with society, and then finally come to a decision of who they're going to be in life. And I find this example very interesting because it's brother and sister. They grow up together. One is quiet, and the other one, and the other one is open-minded. You would have expected the adventurous one to end up in the wild doing crazy stunts, but she decides that her life in school, the identity that she's building is more important than her wild side, where the really quiet kid ends up being the guardian of the forest after he starts growing up as a character. Again, spoilers there. Actually, that's the last of my examples on the screen, but other coming of age stories don't have to be specifically about cartoons or little kids. They can also reflect entire cultures, and science fiction does this consistently. So my favorite example is Babylon 5 because again I am a geek, and but there's a point where ancient beings who have been basically controlling how the universe has been working are kicked out. They're fought off by the younger races. And again, it's not exactly, we're not talking about a character. It's an analogy of sorts. It's the younger races saying, we're grown up. We don't have to follow exactly your example. We're going to be making our own mistakes, but these are our mistakes, and this is our home now. You guys can go away. Please, just go. And obviously, we return to cartoons. That happens all the place. Any cartoon character has a young protagonist is going to deal with this coming of age, be it Star versus Evil, which again starts going a little bit darker as she grows into herself. And My Little Pony.
Yeah. Cutie Mark Crusader is an excellent example of a coming of age story, although arguably nearly all of the main 6 qualify as well. Each of them has something they've believed about themselves. that has either proven to be true or untrue over their course of self-discovery. Now, of course, Ether Echoes was the star of the show. Well of Pyrene is amazing, and without her, we're pretty much just killing time. So, unfortunately, as I said, she could not make it. However, I will now do my best to pretend I am a much more skilled writer than I am. And if I can find her speech notes right here. All right, let's do this. Just be clear, you can't see what okay, good, you can. All right. That would suck some of the dramatic tension out of some parts of this speech if I, in fact, threw it up on the monitor. Come on. There we go. All right. You Can't Go Home Again, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love Forbidden Fruit. All right, so tell me if you've heard this. A kid is down in their life and they encounter a magical world, one where they're special and important. They might even save it, depending on the extent to which the story is all about them. Over the course of their journey, they learn something new and powerful about themselves and gain an important lesson in self-understanding. Then, at the very end, they go back to their parents and resume their normal life with a grown sense of self-confidence. Do we have any children in the room? No. Fuck that. That is the classic coming-of-age narrative. Not the adventure in a magical land part, that's just fantastic window dressing. I'm talking about the part where you get to go home and eat your Captain Crunch and pretend the only thing you gained from your experience is a dose of self-confidence. That is the voice of the status quo that says when you're a child, you're allowed to go out and believe whatever you want to believe, but then you come back home and it's time to become a good conforming member of society with 2.5 kids who votes Republican. This is the basic That was not in her speech. I improvised that last sentence. This is the basic structure of a lot of fantasy fiction, particularly older examples from a time when society was a little more pro-status quo. The Neverending Story and the Chronicles of Narnia both follow this pattern, and it's been copied from them into numerous other sources. It exists, of course, for a reason. People don't go on real magical adventures, and so they can't actually change anything about the real world when they go back. That would make it, fantasy. There's a two-word phrase for this in fiction that describes it rather well: status quo. The natural way of the world cannot be altered, fundamental premises of the settings cannot be questioned, and the characters can never change in any significant way. I, Ether Echoes, am here to tell you that there is a different way, a better way, and I'm just going to spell this out. I want you to hurt your characters. I don't mean that your story should be dark, although a little darkness is always needed to provide contrast. Nor do I mean your characters need to suffer unnecessarily. Speaking as G.A.P. Jack, see, that is a point where I disagree with her. What I'm really saying is that they have to change. They have to really, truly grow. And I think this is all summed up by one simple phrase: you truly can't go home again. Now, you might say, Sarah, for the record, her name is Sarah, you're crazy. Characters in good stories, I believe that's a typo. Characters in good stories, ones who do change and develop, do go home again. They see their parents and they settle down. And yes, in a specifically literal sense, you can go back to the place and the people you are from. You can walk in through the front door and hug your mom after your adventure, whether mundane or fantastic. You can work things out with your dad and resolve all the little issues that plagued you as a child, but you aren't staying in your parents' home forever. You've changed. You've expanded in your awareness, and you no longer fit into the nice little box you did before you had this life-changing experience. Because a life-changing experience, by definition, changes your life. Ooh, that's a broken image link right there. The good news is, fiction is already changing in this regard. Take Harry Potter, for instance, a story about a miserable kid who gets sucked into a fantasy world and never goes back. Another brief interlude here. Can you just imagine the version of that story where Harry Potter goes back to live with the Dursleys afterwards? Just, I'm sorry, it's a very sad place your imagination has gone.
It's not a good place. Huh?
Oh, God, no. Don't say it. Okay. No, we're not. Child-friendly con. I want to talk about a specific example and one that's very near and dear to my heart. Quick show of hands, who here has read Who here has read Well of Pyrene? Excellent. All right, the rest of you will be in the dark for the rest of this. This, I think, is the critical function of any coming-of-age story. Some of you here, hopefully most, have read my most well-known story, Through the Well of Pyrene. In it, a teenage girl named Daphne goes on a quest into Equestria to save her kid sister Amelia after she was kidnapped by monsters. While this is true for all of the main characters to a certain extent, Daphne in particular had her eyes fixed on saving her sister and taking her home to their parents. Through the course of the novel, though, things get complicated, as they so often do. They discovered other worlds, they had to overcome incredible odds. In the end, they come back together, united in a love stronger than anything they had before. But the doors to those worlds didn't close. The scars from those encounters never fully healed. Amelia had blood on her hands, and Daphne had discovered certain truths about herself that could not be put away. And in time, those changes would affect not only the world of Equestria, but their world as well. They and their friends had grown up, and though they did walk back in through their parents' door and into their parents' arms, they walked out again a couple of weeks later. They had lives now in other worlds and other places. They had, in fact, grown up. The real-world equivalent of this is when you leave home. Maybe to college, maybe to the army, maybe to your first job, and sure, you might come back after a while, but even if you live with your parents from then on, you've changed. You are not the person you were. You can't go home again, and that's okay. In your new life, you will have a new home. Some of us build new relationships with people in our lives from before. We might marry the guy we were friends with in school. We might have a supportive relationship with our parents, and siblings where we grow together towards the future. Or we might throw it all away in favor of a new place. The important thing, the linchpin, is that you yourself have changed, and that is the heart of the most powerful and universal story of all, the story we all live. There's a story you're probably all familiar with. A girl in a garden is told not to eat a particular fruit, but she does anyway. The fruit strips her innocence from her and grants her knowledge in its place. She is cast from her home and must make a new life elsewhere. We're told that this is a terrible crime, a wicked act of disobedience. But I ask you, is it better to remain forever in the womb, unchanging and ungrowing? Or is it not better, more engaging, more real, to break out into the world with your teeth, bloody yourself a bit, and leave the safety of your home to discover something new? You can't stay innocent forever, eat the fruit and leave the garden, build, change, grow, and learn to thrive in this new world which you built. BronyCon now endorsing Satanism. Yeah, that, we worked the not family-friendly aspect in there pretty subtly. All right, I think we want to have a more extended Q&A session. So let's start doing questions, bearing in mind the answer to some of these may run pretty long. We're just going to take some cues from the audience of what you'd like to hear us talk about and topics in general. And because BronyCon hates your questions and does not want to hear them, instead of you asking them now, you will be writing them. And then they will be filtered by the BronyCon staff, who I'm going to say know what's best for us in this instance. Skype or Discord? Discord, obviously. Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, Discord, spirit of chaos, it's a question of if Discord will work or not on any given day. Skype, on the other hand, is very orderly. It just never works at all.
Yeah. That's one burned right there.
All right.
You could just go back to using ICQ.
Okay, tell you what. We're really supposed to use the new cards, but while we're waiting for cards to be handed out, we've got one person with his hand up. I'm going to break the rules. Ask away.
And in coming of age, what age would you typically start? Would you start very young? Would you start in your 15s?
So I would say you can do it at any age. There is literally no age requirement on a coming-of-age story. The only requirement is that the character doesn't know who they are. So there is a coming-of-age story I wrote once called Arbitrage of Moments. It has two characters in it who are relevant in this case. Spoiler alert, by the way, Applejack and TikTok. For TikTok, it is a coming-of-age story because he is given a new lease on life. Despite being well into his 60s due to some dark magic, he is given a chance to experience the world anew and decides to completely reinvent what kind of a person he is. For Applejack, it is a coming-of-age story because she discovers Twilight is possessed by the evil spirit of a malevolent dead guy, and that forces her to re-examine some of her assumptions about how things work and drives her out of her shell, and she realizes what kind of person she is in a way that she didn't before that happened.
And again, going back to examples earlier, you can have a 60-year-old, a 30-year-old. It doesn't really matter. I mean, I guess if you're trying to write a story for kids, still, the general rule is just try to use a character that's a little bit older than they are, so that they can still relate and kind of like feel a little bit more confident on. But
Yeah.
all right, fair enough. Yeah, there's no limit there.
One other thing I will note, though, is that adults are really bad at writing children, like really bad. I think I could write my 18-year-old self pretty convincingly. I could not write my 12-year-old self. It would be the uncanny valley robot wearing a human face version of a 12-year-old. And so it's important to keep in mind, will come up in a lot of writing panels, and you'll hear it over and over again. People very rarely make decisions for profound, important reasons that sound good when you put them on a page. They make decisions for stupid, petty reasons that end up compounding upon themselves until there's no way to pull out of this nosedive.
Or they don't even really think about it, and they just do it.
For the first 18 years of my life, I was so cripplingly shy, I could not hold a conversation with a person outside my immediate family. I would freeze up, panic, and literally lost the ability to speak. The reason for this was because I think when I was around 12 or so, I was bullied, and I discovered that if you just shut up and were completely rigid and acted like an inanimate object, the bullies would get weirded out and would leave you alone. And from this, I learned that going catatonic in response to stress was the best possible stress response. And that went on for long enough before my parents noticed that it became ingrained as a behavior. If my parents tell me something is wrong, but it seems to be working, I'm going to listen to my eyes rather than my parents. So I grew up with this habit of being absolutely crushingly, cripplingly shy. When I was 18 and went to college, I said, I'm going to break myself of this habit. I'm going to go talk to people, even if it makes me so stressed I throw up, and at points it did. But again, it ended up changing who I was. So particularly when you're writing very young characters, be sure to focus on those really just, to you as an adult, will seem totally insignificant, petty moments, because those can grow and grow and build and end up defining who we are. Would it be possible to write a coming-of-age story in a single chapter? You want to take the first swing at this?
Yeah, I mean, if you're being a one-shot shit, so who wrote this one? All right, are you talking about like a single chapter in a bigger story, or just a single short story? Okay, yeah, if it's a single short story, I believe you can. It really depends a little bit on how you end it. Using one of my stories as an example, I wrote a story called Gestalt Trace's Last Stand, which is definitely not for kids, but it is a coming-of-age story because she leaves home, she goes through a whole harrowing experience, and she goes back, and there's a lot of consequences and a lot of growing up that she's going to have to face. All of it is done through through her character's eyes as well. So you can hear her voice, but it is a whole little story that tells how she faces the situations, how she considers her past situation and grows up, and it's less than 3,000 words, I believe. So, can you do it? Yes, if you focus exactly on probably on the turning point of when your character realizes that they're breaking up with someone.
I would add to that, there's a story about Edgar Allan Poe. It is apocryphal. Someone bet him that he couldn't write a short story because he tended to go on and on a bit. And so he replied, I'll tell you the shortest horror story that was ever written. For sale, baby shoes never worn. And then, what? Yes. Then someone else in the room, and this part of the story is also apocryphal, picked up their voice and said, I can tell you the second shortest horror story in the world. The last man on earth sat in a room, there was a knock on the door. You can do really effective storytelling with really few words, and that's not genre specific. So we have the next question. Can a coming-of-age story be a straight line? Can the character at the end decide that life has reaffirmed their beliefs, and if so, how would that be made interesting? I'm going to use myself as an example again, and then one of the characters that I've written. So my parents ingrained me with a lot of beliefs. One of those beliefs is that animals' lives are precisely as valuable as human lives, no less. They're huge animal rights activists, vegetarians, etc. Another one of those beliefs is that slavery is wrong. I have changed my mind on animals on the basis that meat is delicious. I enjoy a good hamburger. I have not changed my mind on slavery. Somebody who agrees with literally every single thing their parents have ever told them is an empty vessel with no personality or independent will of their own, and I don't imagine that would be very fun to read about. But people have beliefs that they were raised with and that they stick with their entire life, and that is a normal part of even a character who changes dramatically will keep large aspects of what they were born with. If you want to emphasize that conformity is good, that if you want to have a character who goes on a massive life-changing adventure and then at the end of it says, okay, but I really want to have 2.5 kids and live in a house in the suburbs, you totally can. Just focus on the reason why of all the beliefs that could have changed, that wasn't one of them. What reaffirmed it?
I basically agree with Jackson in this. One example I can think of that I think a lot of people could be familiar with is The Wizard of Oz. Dorothy's basically told that life is fine, like everything will be okay. She goes on this magical journey where, like she accidentally defeats a witch, finds a group of friends of questionable character, meets a wizard that promises a lot of things to her if she does right by him, randomly kills another character who just wanted revenge for her killing her sister, and then gets sent back home with with the method that she always had with her. And her reaction when she gets home is like, I don't need to go any further in my backyard. So it reaffirms what she was being told, that you don't have to go further away. You can just stay where you are. Exactly.
Before we go on to the next question, one other brief example I'd give from a story I've written is Siren Song. She is a character who is intrinsically deeply unethical and dishonest. She is someone who, her instinct when in trouble is to lie and to cheat and to get out of the situation by whatever means she can. And she was raised by Princess Celestia, who taught her to be good and valiant and honorable in all things. She, in large case, ends up as an ends justify the means character. She retains the belief Celestia taught her that what is right and what is good is what is best for everybody else, and you must be prepared to make sacrifices towards that end. The belief she sheds is that those sacrifices can't be made by other people. And you can do whatever twist on that you like, keeping or discarding beliefs as they suit the character. Next question. Is it possible to write a coming-of-age story in which the character's goals never change, and the focus is primarily on their competence? Yes, I'm going to say competence at achieving those goals. Those goals, characters' goals never change, and the focus is primarily on their competence to achieving those goals. Oh, they become more competent over time. Yes, okay.
That's a tough one. I guess you can. Because the thing is, it's not a matter of just, changing your mind. If you have an objective and you achieve it, through everything that happens, like building a rocket, that is a perfectly good way to come of age. Because you can focus on the struggles, etc., and then once they become rocket designers, then they can become business people. Well, yeah, but I like to talk a lot, so that's why I'm in front of people.
If we had an entire show of newbie Dash, I would say yes. Dash knows she's good at flying, that doesn't change. But if there's more to a Wonderbolt than just being fast, then yes, I would say that qualifies. Another example I might actually say is Applejack. Applejack, unfortunately, I would say is an example of a coming-of-age story done poorly. I really love her as a character, but the reason she gets a lot of flack for being the best background pony is because she knows what she wants in life. That goal didn't change from youth to adulthood, and she has achieved it. Meaning, from a character perspective, she just stops. She has what she wants in the world. If you want to read an example of an Applejack coming-of-age story done incredibly well, you can find Contraptionology on FemFish. Yes. For those people who are not currently giving sage nods because they've read the best Applejack fic there ever is, I'll give you the brief summary. Applejack has what she wants in life. She has what she treasures. She has everything in the world that's special to her, which is her family and her farm, and she's content with that. And then this purple mare shows up and just turns everything upside down, and suddenly Twilight's the most important one. And Applejack is put in an awkward position. She can change to be more important. She can be more like Twilight, in which case she will stop being the Applejack she wants to be, or she can continue living on her farm and bucking apples, and that's it, and just accept that she is a supporting character in Twilight's life.
And now I understand why you asked me to write that story.
Yeah.
You bastard.
I wanted to see more of that.
All right.
But yes.
No.
Oh, okay. This is a good one. We can have, okay, we're gonna have fun with this. What aspects would you focus on if you wanted to deconstruct the coming-of-age trope? Oh, okay, I'm gonna have fun with this one. Okay. I'm gonna use the South as an example. American South, kind of big on slavery. I'm gonna be honest, for a significant chunk of the population, it was not really a great place to live for a large part of history. And everybody focuses on, oh, my character grew up in the South, but he's opposed to slavery. That's the coming-of-age story. Of everybody who grew up in the South, do you know how many grew up and decided slavery was wrong? Because it's a rounding error. Nearly all coming-of-age stories are somebody adapting within what society defines as reasonable bounds. Because everybody accepts kids aren't going to be just like their parents. If kids start listening to that weird rock and roll, you go, okay, I don't like it, it's weird, but I accept that my kids are going to do that. If your kids leave and get into a satanic cult, you may decide that that is a little outside the normal bounds of acceptable behavior. So if I wanted to deconstruct a coming-of-age story, I'd have the character go out and have a big life revelation, decide they're totally going to change who they are and be a different person, and come back and their parents go, oh my God, that's adorable. Get a little pat on your head and into your dark music.
I don't even know how I'm going to surpass that example right now.
Oh, come on.
Now go ahead, read another one.
All right.
I'll cup out of this one.
Oh, is there yeah, okay. Can a main character be of age while the other characters are not? Yes, and in fact it is highly encouraged. I'm going to use two examples, one from my own story, one not. The one from my own story is again from Siren Song. Very early in the story, Siren, who is a teenager, she is the child protagonist who is going to come of age, runs into another character named Green Apple. Green Apple is at this point pushing 60. She pretty much knows who she is, and she pretty much knows how she lived her life, and she is of the impression that she wasted all of it. She's getting near the end of her life and has decided that I did not make the best use of my time, and it's a little too late for me to pull out of this nosedive. But here's this young character who hasn't ruined her life yet. She could go on to have a really good life. So pretty much the only thing I've got left to me at this point is making sure this little filly is okay and gets where she needs to be and she's safe and she gets good advice, which would be touching, except Green gives terrible advice, like absolutely terrible. She is at the, remember, skip school to do drugs and drink, levels of bad advice. And so in the story, Siren's coming of age tale, she is a character who is of age and who serves a critical story role, but she's a quasi-antagonist even though she's Siren's best friend. From a character growth perspective, she is bad for Siren, even as in the story she's helping Siren out. From Harry Potter, I would say Dumbledore. Dumbledore is a character who's up. Yeah. Man, I intercepted your example. You were like, "Oh, I know what I'm going to say," and I was all, "Bam!"
No, I've always liked the idea of the of the old wizard guide to the younger student kind of thing. I mean, that's not exclusive obviously to Harry Potter. There's Pyromancer and a whole bunch of other stories from back in the day. Pyromancer was written by Clyde Cadwell, so go read it if you guys see it. It's unlikely, but it's a good one. But it's always there's always a well-intentioned character that wants to guide this, like a parent. You don't want your kid to make the same mistakes that you did, and yet you inevitably guide them into the same exact problem, which I know for a fact happens in real life because I can see my kid just going to probably end up riding some bus at the top of the top speed, but he learns from his dad.
One other example I'd give that I think is specifically worth mentioning is Snape. Snape knows what kind of guy he is. He is someone who is entirely comfortable retaliating against a 12-year-old child because that child's mother once rejected him. He is a bad person, and he became a Death Eater because all the other Death Eaters looked at him and went, oh, that dude's legit. That dude gets to be in our club. Now, granted, when he realized the full extent of what Voldemort was up to, and various other personal revelations, he pulled a little bit back from that brink. Snape is not pure liquid darkness. He did work for the good guys in the end. But he is somebody who abuses a 12-year-old child because of something his mother did decades ago and doesn't lose a bit of sleep over it.
A little bit petty.
Yeah. Here's a good one. Would you say that a midlife crisis is a coming-of-age story? I would say that depends. If your midlife crisis consists of going, oh my God, I've wasted my life, I need to buy a sports car and date somebody younger until I feel better about myself, then no, it does not.
It's kind of like the opposite right there.
Feel shame. If on the other hand, let's say you want to write a story, I'm going to use an example, Filthy Rich. After 50 years of managing his business, he has more money than he knows what to do with. He just sits up one morning and realizes, you know what? I've done this. I like running my business. I'm good at it, but I've stopped learning. There is nothing about running Barnyard Bargains I don't already know. I have nothing left to learn. And so he sells his business and decides he's going to become a gourmet cook because the purpose of life is to learn new things and be challenged, and that wasn't happening where he was anymore.
I can see what that would do to Diamond Tiara.
I don't know, like, Diamond Tiara seems like one of those kids who supports her dad unconditionally.
I guess she's grown up. His wife, though.
Yeah, well, the wife's a different matter.
His soon-to-be ex-wife.
But that's where the coming-of-age story is. If, Filthy Rich has believed for his entire life that his wife genuinely loves him, and then he decides to sell his business, and the moment he's not the richest pony in town, she gets snippy, and he realizes, oh my God, I've left my only daughter in the care of a gold digger. That could be it could have nothing to do with the whole gourmet cooking thing. That could take back seat. You could use that as a trick, and then the reader gets in and you're like, oh, you're in for some drama now. Yes, exactly. Someone must write this story. I kind of do want to write that story now. But yeah,
I'll write it before you do. So.
Not if I write it first. Yes. Okay, this is interesting. Can you name a coming-of-age story written before the year 1770? If not, why not? I'm assuming not every story with a character arc is a coming-of-age story. So I would say, actually, probably I can't, at least not in the modern sense. It may exist. If it does, it's pretty obscure. And because of one thing I said earlier, that in modern society, we pretty much accept that kids are not going to turn out to be like their parents. Parents may gripe about the specific details, but we recognize that's not a flaw. Culturally, that was not always the case. There was a large part of human history where we were completely unironic about the fact that change is bad. And you go out into the world, you study, you learn, and you realize your parents were right about everything. And unfortunately, stories from before a certain period tend to assume that character. Like there's one example, I'm sorry, the name is escaping me at the moment. It's one of the great Victorian novels. You can probably Google it. It is about a young woman who is just enjoying the social life in London. She doesn't really have any responsibilities other than be pretty and go to balls. When she is waiting outside her father's study because she wants to ask him for money to buy a nice new dress, and she listens in on his conversation and realizes that his business is dangerously underwater. They are, in fact, up to their eyeballs in debt and are merely keeping up the appearances of things. She decides that means she needs to marry a rich guy right now, dumps the boy who she actually loved and cared about and who was really sweet to her, courts a man who doesn't treat her very well, but he got that cash, and ends up marrying him. And the book's coda ends on her basically deciding that she hates this guy, But if she keeps him happy, which doesn't require that much effort on her part, honestly, she'll have a nice life and he'll give her some kids, and that's about it. And we read this today and go, oh my God, this is tragic. This is a terrible story. It's an ode to despair. At the time, it was considered a very moral primer for young women to read and an understanding of many of the practicalities they would face in the world. If you have a daughter, give her this book. It will help her understand what she's in for. Cultural expectations towards change have changed.
I was really trying to remember. The only story that I can think of that is ancient is a coming-of-age story is a Popol Vuh, which was written, or it's more pronounced like Popol Vuh. But anyway, it was written before the Spaniards arrived in America, and it is a story about two brothers, and that's the thing. Like, it's all I completely forgot about it now. But I know it was a coming-of-age story. Going a little bit more recent though, like I think that most of what could be considered coming-of-age stories from before the 1770s would have been stuff that was adapted at some point by the Brothers Grimm. I mean, because we've already established you don't have to disagree with your parents to have grown up. It's a coming-of-age story could be Cinderella just stepping out into the world and be marrying the princess. In a way, like she changed her life. In a way, she made a decision to escape from her stepsisters and her stepmother, and have them have their eyes pecked out by birds. The wedding, but it's
The original story is dark.
Yeah. I don't recall when Pinocchio was written, but that is a coming-of-age story as well. Anyone knows when it was written? It was, yeah. I mean, he kills his conscience really early on it.
Oh, we got a good
yeah.
one.
It's still horrible. Have you seen that scene where the kids are turned into donkeys?
No, we don't discuss that scene. I still have traumatic nightmares about that. All right, we've got a really good one. Can you give a few tips on how to improve Starlight Glimmers' coming-of-age story? Hopefully a bit more than her friend left. Oh, and she can't write letters. Okay. So Starlight Glimmer, actually, I'd say we haven't seen her coming-of-age story. We have seen the beginning of her coming-of-age story, and we have seen the end of it, but we have not seen what occurred in between. I won't say it wouldn't be a fic, but if you were inclined to write a character where you say, this person grew up to believe that their childhood friend leaving them started in a chain reaction that ended with them running a cult in a small town out in the world. Not that it actually did, because plenty of people lose childhood friends and don't go on to run cults. But that Starlight would.
It's only because they didn't meet Maud Pie on the way.
Yeah. But let's never tell that story again. But consider, don't say, why did Starlight's friend leaving her cause Starlight to run a cult? Because it's never that simple. What causes Starlight, a full-grown adult, who's had presumably dozens of major significant events in her life between now and then, to decide that this one thing, this was my start of darkness. After that, my entire life was preordained. This is a character who feels she has had a profound lack of choice in her life. That at no point between being 12 and being a full-grown adult does she feel she had any chance to divert from her course. And the question is, why? Is she a profoundly weak person who just suffers from severe social anxiety, and the way she decided to deal with that was by developing terrible control issues and bending everyone around her to her will? Did she have incredibly controlling parents? Like, we catch a glimpse of her parents. I don't get the impression they had a super positive relationship. Did her parents micromanage every single aspect of her life to the point that she decided, if this one thing is broken, I can never be happy again? That does seem terrible, yes.
How do you even do that properly?
Or is it as simple as something else in her life, like maybe the Snape-like teacher we see her with, prevented her from making friends? She lost, what? Yes, the heartwarming tale. Oh. Well, yeah. Okay, still, maybe something in her life prevented her from making friends after that, and so she looks back on Sunburst? Yes. She looks back on Sunburst as the last time in her life she was happy. And so, of course, she blames its absence for everything wrong that has ever happened after that. Starlight's story, her slide into darkness and her coming-of-age story, honestly has very little to do with Sunburst. Sunburst wasn't there. Whatever happened to make her that way didn't involve him. It just caused her to attribute things to him.
Yeah, I would, if it came to writing a story about how she came to be like that, you would have to focus on the many events that Jaxie brought up that she's faced and how those kind of build upon that childhood trauma. I mean, because that little town where she lived, you know, like he gets a cutie mark and everyone gets happy and she gets abandoned. It's kind of like a creepy town to me. I don't know about you guys, but you know, like again, the point is, you know, like how do you get from being, you know, like a happy child whose friend goes away, and like this says, you know, like she never figured out how to write a letter, you know, to being the enemy of anything that lives, that is outside of your little cult of equality, you know. Did she ever date someone and they left again for Celestia's school? You know, there's a lot of things in your personal life that have happened that mold you into who you are. You know, like hers, again, you know, going to the whole presentation earlier, her little society down there has to have affected in some way. Did she never get support? Was she told at an early age, well, everyone is going to leave you? Maybe her parents were just that dramatic, you know, like you can only support yourself, or you. Maybe she just got told that she can't control things, and then she took it to the next level. So, if you write a coming-of-age story for Starlight Glimmer, it has to focus not on the initial problem on where she ends up, but rather on all the other things that reinforce the one problem that she started with.
I would add one other thing. We've got 3 minutes left. I can think of one story. It's not a proper coming-of-age story, but it has aspects of it. Written before 1770, way before 1770, the Iliad.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Yes. So I'm actually gonna reference the Odyssey first. At the start of the Odyssey, Odysseus believes he knows who he is. He's a king, and he has strong ideas of what being a king means. That he needs to be clever, that he needs to look out for himself and his people and everybody else, if it's convenient, in that order. That a king looks out for his subjects and his people above all else. He can't be afraid to be the first to resort to violence. When somebody wrongs his people, he needs to seek vengeance. He has a long list of beliefs about what that means. Then he goes back home and discovers that a bunch of people have been hitting on his wife while he's away. And his response to that is, oh, bunch of people gonna die, which is completely in keeping with his character up to this point. And in the final bit of the story, he realizes, yes, these people have been hitting on my wife. Yes, I'm angry. Yes, everything about what I think being a king means, or even what I think being a man means if you hit on my wife, you need to die now. But if I do this, it's gonna start something I can't stop. And the entire Greek peninsula is going to, experience a terrible war, drown in blood. And he, for the first time in the story, when wronged, decides not to seek vengeance upon the person who wronged him. Overall, it's not a coming-of-age story, but the climax of the story isn't Odysseus going on a grand adventure or fighting monsters or any of that. It's him realizing something about himself that is very different from what he's been through so far. And we got 30 seconds left.
I think we can wrap it up.
All right. Oh, last question. Very quick.
Like basically, I'm with either Echoes here when they return to the status quo. Like if you go through like such a big change and you're exactly like the person you were before, that's my pet peeve. Like you can't go on something and not change.
I also agree with Ether Echoes, but just to vary it up a little bit, my number 2 pet peeve is anachronisms. If you're writing a story about a character who lives in the American South, they should be pro-slavery, unless there is a very, very strong reason for them not to be. If you are writing a character who lives in classical Greece, they should think that murdering an entire town to take their stuff because they were weaker than you and you wanted their stuff is an entirely reasonable way to run a country. If you're writing a coming-of-age story that takes place in Victorian-era Britain, your character should have a reasonable explanation for why British people are better than other people. And if you want to write a coming-of-age story that's about them realizing that's wrong, that's fine, but they need to start there. All right, with that, we're out of time. Thank you very much.
All right.
questions.